the video. Preferably with audio.
I was asked by the Senator what I thought the timeline might be for any potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait. I responded that I thought our concerns were, in fact, in the next 6 years. While I was fortunate to visit Taiwan just a little over 6 months ago, government officials there described the last 2 years in their security environment as the most severe in their history, with multi-domain blockade reversals and attack demonstrations from all directions, from all domains. The PRC continues its campaign to coerce, co-opt, and corrupt other countries and business and political elites across the region to undermine the overall security landscape. The PRC also continues its integration of PRC civil and military entities. It continues to deepen the reach of its national security laws, even affecting U.S. business in the PRC. And lastly, the PLA continues to follow Chairman Xi's edict to fight and win by 2027.
I think if you're in a kinetic war where munitions are flying, the natural result of that is all maritime shipping in the area will stop. A much more sudden and immediate severing of relations. And important American companies, and notably Apple, would likely see the value of their operations fall very substantially just because of their supply chain dependence on a mix of Taiwan and China. Of particular importance to the U.S., the flow of semiconductors out of Taiwan. That if you don't have the right chips, you can't produce a functional car. For some specific components, it would be almost impossible in the short run to find those components. I think your baseline would assume a near complete freeze of cross-border financial transactions and U.S. financial assets inside China would also likely be frozen. This is one of these jump kind of risk. Enormous amounts of instability in global financial markets. Those Americans who've invested in specific Chinese companies or who've invested in indexes that have some exposure to China would see a meaningful portion of their wealth impaired. It would be responsible for all those making significant investments to make their portfolios, to the extent possible, resilient in the face of this kind of shock.
In March of 2020,
We could play it again, but I think we got the message. For years, national security leaders like Admiral Davidson have been screaming from the rooftops that the People's Republic of China, and specifically the Chinese Communist Party, poses the greatest threat to our country. President Biden's Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, recently testified that, quote, the CCP represents both the leading and most consequential threat to U.S. national security. Just yesterday, the Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall, said that the intelligence couldn't be clearer. China is preparing for war with the United States. So to be a sobering message to all of us. Yet here in New York, it seems sometimes that Wall Street does not act like the PRC is a threat at all. A few months back, the head of a major asset management firm came to my office and told me that the chance of China invading Taiwan in the next 5 years was, and I quote, zero, not near zero, zero. Another told me that the U.S. would never impose real sanctions on China, even if it were to invade Taiwan. It seems like Washington and Wall Street are two different countries speaking completely different languages. And it's ironic because these banks and asset managers have incredibly complex value-at-risk models to look at volatility and correlation. But when it comes to the systemic risks emanating from a genocidal communist regime, they tend to put on their golden blindfolds and chase a yield that never comes. Ranking Member Krishnamurthy and I recently launched an investigation into Wall Street firms that are funneling American retirement money into companies that help build aircraft carriers for the PLA, next-generation stealth fighter jets for their Air Force, and artillery shells for the PLA. Mind you, these companies are all blacklisted by the U.S. government and often have strong prohibitions on selling them advanced technology, according to our export controls. Yet Wall Street sees no problem in shoveling money to them. So imagine if the disastrous scenario that Admiral Davidson fears is all too plausible actually comes to pass. China's military could be raining missiles on our friends in Taiwan and very likely American service members with weapons that Americans funded. They may be using AI targeting systems that Silicon Valley VCs helped them build. In short, we're at risk of financing our own destruction. The Biden administration's executive order is a first step to address the problem, but it must not be the last. It is up to Congress to ensure American money isn't financing the CCP's top tech ambitions, including AI, quantum computing, and semiconductors, but also biotechnologies, directed energy, hypersonics, advanced manufacturing, space technologies, anything associated with the PRC's military-industrial complex. Here's the thing. Every day that we keep funding the CCP's military ambition, every day that we delay vital military aid to Taiwan, we make conflict in the Indo-Pacific more likely. Last night, we hosted a variety of Wall Street executives at a tabletop exercise that focused not on missiles and torpedoes, but rather on sanctions, shipping routes, the SWIFT system, supply chains, and other areas of economic warfare. We saw that if China were to initiate preparations to invade Taiwan, the losses across our financial system would dwarf the right taken at the outset of the Russia-Ukraine war. The entire U.S. economy, banking system would be imperiled. Equity markets would drop precipitously as global shipping lanes closed. Shipping insurance premiums would skyrocket, supply chains would break down. And the specter of global conflict would grow, causing further chaos in the global financial system. Americans would likely see their pensions shrink, their bank accounts hemorrhage cash. So the question is, what are we doing? What is Wall Street doing to guard against that outcome? Are banks and asset managers moving to protect American investors, or are they just betting on another bailout? The risks, in my opinion, go well beyond a conflict in Taiwan Strait. American investors in China are like the proverbial frog slowly boiling in a pot of water. The CCP is criminalizing routine business practices, often ones necessary for fulfilling fiduciary obligations to investors and shareholders, like due diligence, data gathering, independent corporate governance. Given those risks are myriad, you would think that if American higher accounting regulatory firms, especially when they list on our exchanges, but in fact, very opposite. A recent deal struck between the SEC, PCAOB, and the Chinese government effectively circumvents the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act and allows China to audit its own firm, throwing American investors to the wolves and disadvantaging American companies. The CCP has nothing but contempt for our democratic capitalist system. Why should they enjoy the unfettered benefits of our capital markets? If nothing else, you would think Wall Street would think twice about financing companies that facilitate the CCP's Uyghur genocide, engage in forced genetic testing of repressed populations, or use forced labor up and down their supply chains. To quote written testimony submitted by David McCormick, the former CEO of Bridgewater Associates, will these firms ever stop underwriting moral behavior? The truth is American pensions, endowments, and retirement savings are not being protected. They're being swindled. Fraud, fake accounting, and outright lies of the endemic communist system. Taking on a genocidal communist regime as a business partner is not a recipe for success. It is a recipe for systemic risk. And with that, I recognize the ranking member, Raja Krishnamurthy, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning to all of our attendees, and thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Chair, just a couple weeks ago, we were in Stoughton, Wisconsin. Just a few weeks before that, we were in Dysart, Iowa. Today, we're here in New York City. Over the past 6 weeks that we've traveled the company, we've seen a dominant theme emerge. The CCP has taken aggressive steps to advance its economic interests at the expense of American ones. Doing nothing in response to these risks posed by the CCP's economic aggression is not an option. These risks harm people in the smallest towns and the biggest cities. They threaten industries from the corn and soy fields of Iowa to the factories of Wisconsin to the trading floors of Wall Street. They are risks realized through intellectual property theft and forced technology transfer, by unfair trade and industrial policy, and by a military-civil fusion system that takes American dollars and uses them to fuel military aggression and human rights abuses. When we were in Iowa, we asked what we could do to better protect our farmers and the intellectual property that helps to feed the world. When we were in Wisconsin, we asked what we could do to better protect our job creators who help to create paths into the middle class. And now here in New York, the world's financial capital, it's important that we ask what we can do to better protect Americans' money and the global financial system. Let's use the federal government's thrift savings plan as an example. As reported by Newsweek earlier this summer, more than 115 mutual funds in the Thrift Savings Plan, or otherwise known as the TSP, contain more than 20 sanctioned or watch-listed PRC companies or their subsidiaries. These companies make, among other things, fighter aircrafts and ship engines for the People's Liberation Army and pose a direct national security risk. They also use Uyghur forced labor to produce textile, clothing, household electronics goods, and medicines. By investing in these companies, we risk supporting the CCP's military aggression and their human rights abuses. But that's not the only risk facing American investors from the CCP. As of January 2023, there were more than 250 Chinese companies listed on U.S. stock exchanges with a total market cap of over $1 trillion. These are stocks that Americans are investing in every day. But they don't come with what most Americans consider to be standard investor protections. Their complicated corporate structures carry massive risk. All the while, the CCP is cracking down on the very act of disclosing risks. The CCP is doing this by cracking down on due diligence to the point where the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has said that, quote, risk can't be properly assessed. The CCP is so afraid of bad news getting out that they've stopped publishing their skyrocketing youth unemployment numbers and instructed investment banks to avoid publishing politically sensitive data that could make the Chinese economy look bad. It's no wonder that just a couple weeks ago, Secretary Gina Raimondo said that according to some business leaders, quote, China is uninvestable because it's become too risky. It's our job on this select committee to make sure that our constituents face less risk and more certainty. It's our job to make sure that in the same way your food supply and your jobs are protected from harmful CCP policies, that your money is protected too. It's why we've acted as a committee to launch a bipartisan investigation into American VC firms supporting Chinese AI, semiconductor, and quantum computing companies, as well as asset managers and index providers helping to direct capital to red flag companies that violate human rights and strengthen the Chinese military. It's also why I believe the Biden administration has taken critical and positive steps to address these problematic outbound investments, steps that deserve our support and legislative action to strengthen them. The stakes for our families from Iowa to Wisconsin to New York are simply too high to ignore, and they are too high for us to settle on a path of inaction. I look forward today to hearing from our witnesses about what we can do to address these risks and protect the interests of the American people. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Thank you. If any other member wishes to submit a statement for the record without objections, those statements will be added to the record. We are privileged today to have a great lineup of witnesses, each of whom brings a unique set of insights into the threat the Chinese Communist Party poses to U.S. financial stability. Unfortunately, one of our witnesses, Mr. Panos, could not make it here due to bad weather. My understanding is he was over Pennsylvania when his plane was forced to turn around, and he could not find any other flights due to air traffic control in New York. I will not make a sort of jab at LaGuardia or JFK. I appreciate the hospitality we've been shown in New York City. But I just really want to quote his testimony, exceptional. I encourage you all to read it. One thing that stood out to me was this quote. I've often said that China is the only country in the developed world that knows its GDP on January 1st of that year. However, as GDP grows, so does the required amount of additional investment needed to grow in the future, much of which is debt funded. We call this China's treadmill to hell. So, he didn't pull any punches in the testimony. Our first witness is the Honorable Jay Clayton, who will help us understand the breadth and severity of the systemic risk that the PRC's penetration of our capital market creates. Mr. Clayton served as the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission from May 2017 to December 2020 and is now of counsel to Sullivan and Cromwell. Next to him, we have Ms. Ann Stevenson Yang, the founder of J Capital Research. Having lived in and studied in China and studied the PRC market for decades, Ms. Stevenson Yang brings a unique credibility in unraveling the truth behind the data on the PRC economy. Thank both of you for being here this morning. If you could please rise and raise your right hand, I'll now swear you in. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? You may be seated. Let the record show that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you all. Mr. Clayton, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Gallagher, Ranking Member Christian Mathory. It's nice to be here today. I submitted detailed written testimony. What I think I'll do is respond a bit to your opening remarks and make 4 points. First, I want to recognize Speaker McCarthy, Leader Jeffries, and the members of the committee for taking on this task. It is a complex, difficult, and I would say novel task. I don't know that in our globally integrated economy we have ever had the two largest economies be deeply conjoined, but also what I would say is deeply at odds in certain areas. It is a difficult task. It is one that spans not just financial regulation, but as you both mentioned, national security, trade policy, human rights, and dare I say foreign policy, because it's not a bilateral issue, it's a multilateral issue. So congratulations and thank you. Next thing is the touchstones of financial regulation. Touchstones of financial regulation at the individual firm level, why we make investments, why we pull back investments, go down to transparency and accountability. I think we should remember those as we look to craft policy going forward and the policies that we have. Given good information, which you need accountability to have good information, investors generally make good decisions. The other one is stability, financial stability. The commitment of the U.S. and other countries to financial stability, to responsible capital rules, to liquidity rules. It gives us the confidence in order to have a globally integrated financial system. If you're confident that other countries have a commitment to stability, it's much easier to trade with them and have cross-border investments. The next thing, and it's a bit of a sobering pill, is the limits of financial regulation. Financial regulation can be incredibly powerful. Capital flows are incredibly powerful. They finance the future, they do things. And as I said, investors are very good at responding to good information. Investors are very good at responding to financial metrics and prudential requirements. Financial institutions are. Investors are not good at, they don't have the information to be good at, human rights, national security, trade policy. Those are matters for the government. And I want to emphasize that. But what I will say, and my last point, is that given clear and coherent direction from governments, the power of the market to respond to policy is remarkable. If a recent example provides this, the Russian sanctions around financial instruments and financial markets were incredibly powerful. They were comprehensive, they were bilateral, and immediately people pulled back. Now, that, I think, has caused a number of people on Wall Street and the investment community to look at what would happen in a similar scenario with China. And I have seen initial indicia of people looking at what would happen, going over those scenarios, and starting to think, okay, how can I de-risk such a situation? One of the recommendations I make, and I will close with this, is that the U.S. government, through the FSOC or other body, could do that kind of scenario planning and help us better understand what the risks are and how to de-risk any type of abrupt shift in investment and capital flows. And with that, I thank you.